Welcome to the Seek Wisdom podcast, where we talk with others who love Jesus about wisdom in the faith. Today, our guest is Pastor Kevin Taylor. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing I want to ask you is, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, how long have you been a follower of Jesus? And what else should we know about you?
First of all, married for 43 years.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. It's worked out.
That's good.
Yeah, 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren, 1 on the way.
Awesome.
Been a believer since I was about 8 years old.
Okay.
I think it was really 15 years old when I really decided that I think I'm going to do this for sure. So that's been a while ago too, but 15 years old. And we served in 4 churches as music pastors.
Cool.
Jolene and I. And our last church we've been at was here at Journey Church. And we've been here 28 years.
Awesome.
So the first 9 years we came as worship pastors. And then the last 19, we've been in leadership. So it's been an amazing joy, amazing ride.
Awesome. That's great. The first thing I always like to ask is, what is your life verse and how does that impact your life?
First of all, I think it's a great question. So thanks for asking it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think everybody should have one.
Yeah.
If not a life verse, then a life passage, because I think that's the thing that really does guide your life. That's the thing that I keep going back to over and over and over again in my life. I think that life verses convict you and draw you in and really set a standard for your life. And so I've had my life verse for probably 25 years. It hasn't changed. I think they can change.
Sure.
But mine hasn't.
Okay.
Mine stayed the same. You want to know what it is?
Yes, absolutely.
It's Acts 13:36, and kind of obscure. It's not one of those verses that, like, oh yeah, I know that. I knew that verse.
Find it at Hobby Lobby on
That's
a
right.
plaque.
It's on a plaque. It's on your bumper sticker.
Right.
But it's a verse that I happened across one day, and I went back to it 2 or 3 times. Like, it isn't like I'd never read that verse before.
Right.
But the Holy Spirit in that moment did something to me and zeroed me in on that. So Acts 13:36, that says, when David had served God's purposes in his own generation, he fell asleep. And so I've just inserted my name into that.
Yeah.
So when Kevin has served God's purposes in his own generation, then he can fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I think by falling asleep, I don't mean take a good nap.
Right.
I think that it's deeper than that. And so that's my life verse.
Yeah. That's heavy.
I think that it is about, doing everything that you feel God has called you to do.
Yeah.
And you don't even know what all that is. As life goes by, he shows you more, he unfolds more, he pulls back more curtains for you. And because I think that the heart of a believer is to serve Jesus, not in an advisory capacity, but he's asking you to serve with a spirit of servant mentality. And I think that's what David did. I mean, of all the people in the Bible, David, who was what? Not just a king or a warrior or a composer or a musician, an adulterer,
Right.
A cheater, a liar, a murderer. He was all of those things, and yet a man after God's heart.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mind-boggling to me what God did with that man. And so if I could just be a tenth, a 100th of what not the liar part or the murderer part, but just a man after God's heart.
Yeah.
Imperfect, flawed. That would be incredible. And so however God can use me in my generation, and again, by my generation, I don't just mean my age,
Sure.
but
Sure.
in this generation. And, when that time is done, whenever that is, it's not yet, but I'll say, okay, God, I'm ready for whatever you have for me next. So that's kind of what that verse is about.
That's so good. That's convicting and amazing and humble, and thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. So the topic that I wanted to ask you about today is actually living for Christ. I think as believers in Jesus, that's a wonderful thing to believe in him. But if all we do is believe in him, if all we do is, yeah, as you said, like use him as an advisor almost, like that's great. but you are someone who I view as someone who really lives for Christ and his purposes. And I think your life verse is a testament to that. So could you maybe speak on that a little bit? What does it really mean, in your opinion, to live for Christ and not just believe in him?
I think that there has become a wave of believing but not following. In fact, there was a poll done by Barna not that long ago, and it said that 76% of Christians consider themselves believers, but only 8% in the same poll said they were actually following Jesus.
Wow.
And it was kind of startling to me
Yeah.
because Jesus didn't give us a category for believing but not following.
Right.
To believe is to follow. But somehow we've compartmentalized that and we've pulled that apart so that somehow we are believing in Jesus almost like we believe in Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
But we're not following because nobody today is following Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
No one is. But we can somehow believe in Jesus but not follow him. And so actually the word Christian is only in the Bible 3 times. And 2 of those times it's derogatory. Because,
Really?
yes, because people considered Christians back then people who didn't believe that the emperor was God. So you believe somebody else is. And so that was not a good designation. However,
Interesting.
the word disciple is mentioned 200 times in the Bible, New Testament, and 13 times in one way or another, Jesus said, follow me. He never said, believe in me, but follow me. In fact, that was his word to the early disciples, right? They're down by the lake with the boats and they leave their nets, and Jesus didn't say to them, believe in me. He said, follow. I mean, they didn't even believe yet.
Right.
They followed first.
That's so
and then
good.
believe. We kind of have that reversed, I think. Believe in Jesus and follow him. That's not how he did it. He said, follow me, and somewhere during the process of your following, then you will believe in me. And I think that there are, most of us have, I think, certain areas of our life where we say yes to Jesus and other areas of our life where we say no to Jesus. And I believe that, the more often that you say no to Jesus, the easier it is to say no to Jesus.
Right.
The more often you say yes to Jesus, the easier it is to say yes to Jesus. And so I think that God is trying to get us to a point where the phone can ring, but we don't have to answer it. So the phone ring of greed,
Sure.
it can
sure.
ring.
Okay.
We don't have to answer, because we're following. We're not just believing. The phone ring of gluttony, the phone ring of lust, whatever it is, can ring, but we can leave it ringing. We don't have to go to that because we're really following Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a distinction to be made between believing in Jesus and following Jesus. And God hasn't set a calling in front of you that he hasn't empowered you to live out.
Right.
He doesn't ask you to do something that you can't possibly do. So when he calls us to follow, we might say, I can't. I don't know how. It is impossible. Oh, yeah. He said he doesn't ask us to do things that we can't do.
Right.
So following is not only possible, but likely for us
Right.
if we keep our eyes on Jesus.
No, that's so good. Man, I would love to ask you a little bit of a follow-up to that. You said something along the lines of, someone who might hear a calling from God and I say, that's impossible, like, I don't know how, or something like that. Could you maybe speak to that a little more, like maybe to someone who has received a calling that is way outside of the scope of what their plans for their life? I almost think back of the scene in Evan Almighty where Morgan Freeman is God, played by Morgan Freeman. He says, this isn't part of my plans here, Steve Carell says, and Morgan Freeman laughs and says, your plans. That's funny.
Right.
So could you maybe speak maybe some encouragement or some hard words to hear, whatever you feel is necessary about like that a little bit more, someone who feels like they're called into something that is impossible for them?
Yeah, I think when we're called, we have an idea what that means. And it isn't always what God means for us. And so the call of God in our life, I think, has to be worked out. So you aren't just called and you're just thrust into it. I think calling's a process. And so we are We are following Jesus. We are living out the call, but we're living it day to day. We're not necessarily we're not living the end result today.
Right.
It's a journey, pun intended, because that's the name of our church,
Right.
Journey Church. But it is a journey. All of life is. And the call of God on my life, what I thought it was 40 years ago, is not what it ended up to be. And maybe for some people it is.
Sure.
That maybe that is fulfilled exactly like they saw it. That didn't happen for me. And I'm guessing for most people it doesn't. And so I think it's just a process of, again, following Jesus, letting him speak to you, being obedient, and he'll turn the pages for you. I think it's a huge walk of trust. I mean, to be honest, when I gave my life to Jesus way back, nobody told me how ruthless he was going to be about like everything.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe they did tell me, but I don't think I believed them.
Mm.
I mean, he was going to tell me to give up that habit. He was going to tell me that no to that kind of relationship. He was going to tell me what to do with my resources. He was going to tell me what to do with all kinds of things. And I don't think I was prepared for that.
Yeah.
Like I still have my life to live, God. So if you could just like butt out
Right.
of some of that,
Yeah.
and that, I think that's part of the calling.
Yeah.
It's digging your heels not in but out,
Mm.
and following Jesus that way. So I mean, because to be real, there's a lot of hard teachings in the Bible, right? The Bible has a lot of hard things to say.
Yeah.
So if we're going to follow Jesus and be submitted to the calling that he's put in our lives, then we have to be willing to do some hard things.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like bench press 400 pounds.
Mm.
I mean, if he calls us to forgive somebody as part of our calling, and I think that is part of our calling, forgive that person that you say it's impossible to forgive. That's a hard teaching. When he says to love your enemies, I mean, for some of us, however maybe we grew up, maybe a parent is an enemy because of how we were treated. And he says to forgive that person or love that person. I mean, that is just a flat out hard teaching.
Yeah.
But it's part of your calling. And it goes back to my life verse. That's part of fulfilling the call of God on my life in this generation, is to do what God has called me to do. But that's not easy.
Right.
So I think you have to be ready, if you say, I'm called by God, I'm following Jesus, to say it's a beautiful journey, wonderful, so many great things ahead of you, and also some valleys that you have to navigate with Jesus that are also, when you look back, beautiful. It's much easier to see God in the rearview mirror than it is when you're looking forward, I
Right.
think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I have another question similar to that one, but you actually opened with the thought of like God's call on your life and how it looks and stuff like that, how you might want it to look. And I think that I personally have struggled with a train of thought that I'd love to ask you about, which is for those of you who don't know, I lived in Seattle for 4 years, and I was out there specifically because God told me to go, and I'm happy I did it. I don't regret it, and I believe he called us back, and
Sure.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
We didn't run,
Love that you're back.
but yeah, thanks. I love to be back. But in that, I struggled towards the end of our time out there. It was getting really expensive. We were running out of money. Our first child was around 6 months old. Our lease was about to renew. We were struggling. We didn't know what to do. We were like, God, you've called us out here, and now we feel like we're being pulled back.
Yeah.
Is this the easy thing to do? Are we feeling this because we're financially strained, and so therefore we're being called
Sure.
to go home? Like, is that a justification? And we really struggled with it. It was really scary and hard, and we were on a time crunch because we didn't know whether to renew our lease or not. And I guess maybe I do somewhat ask this for me, but
Yeah.
could you maybe speak to that? Like, where is the balance of, like, how do you know it's the call? Like, I've been a Christian for a long time, and I didn't really know, So, like, I don't know if I really know the question that I'm trying to ask, other than, like, the thought of maybe having you speak into, when is it justification? When is it a call? How do you know? Even if you've been a Christian for a while, sometimes it's hard to know, even if you already have that discernment.
Sure.
Could you maybe speak to some of that, you know?
Yeah. Being familiar with the voice of God is something we all want to do. I want to do that. You want to do that.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to do that. Who's a Christ follower? And the voice of God, I think, comes as a whisper. First Kings talks about, it wasn't in the earthquake. It wasn't in the violent wind. It wasn't, in the shakeup. It was in the whisper of God. And a whisper can be hard to hear, but a whisper can also be easy to ignore.
Mm,
And so I think that we serve a God who is abundantly gracious.
yeah.
So I think that we can get really caught up in, did I make a mistake? Shouldn't I have, was it better to do this, or was I wrong to? I think that there is such a broad, beautiful embrace of God in this, that I went to Seattle, felt
Right.
God calling me to Seattle. It got challenging, and sometimes that is the voice of God speaking to you. And other times God says, no, the challenge is the hard thing is okay. Uh, it's okay to push through it.
Right.
But if we make decisions to say, hey, I'm coming back now, and I'm just using your example now,
Sure, sure.
I just believe that God is inordinately gracious to us, where he doesn't go, you know what, you came back, you missed it.
Right.
I don't see that in the character of God. I see God caring about our family and about our provision, and about our satisfaction and our fulfillment and all those things. And when those things get, at odds or interrupted, I think that I could look back on my life, and I won't tell you exactly what, but I think there were a couple things that I did that, looking back, I say to myself, I'm not sure that that was what God wanted me to do.
Hmm.
But he still blessed my life.
Right.
It wasn't like all of a sudden from that point forward, he was, throwing arrows at me from every angle. That's not what God does. He reorients us now to the new space, or to the new place, or the
Right.
new situation.
He'll use you
He will,
wherever.
right? I often say, I hope I'm right.
Okay.
Could be wrong. But I always say God doesn't have a plan B. It's all plan A.
Okay.
So when something happens in your life, or a serious situation, are we saying that God was surprised by that? Are we saying that God didn't know that was going to happen? So are we saying then, because he didn't, he needed to, pull out a new plan,
Right.
because I didn't see that coming?
Right.
That's never how God views anything. And so I use that illustration to say it's always plan A.
Yeah.
So the Petersons came back, and now they're going, was that the right thing? Or is that, and I believe that God goes, this is what you did, and I'm with you.
Mm.
It wasn't like there was a sin committed there. It was a decision that I make about my future and my life and my family. I'm making it with the very best brain that I have as I'm listening to God. But I think that we could easily say that whenever what we do or decisions we make are at odds with God, or at odds with his word, that was not the voice of God.
Right.
I think we agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
But where you have to use the brain that God gave you in order to make decisions,
Right.
I think that there's a whole lot of latitude that God says, yeah, I'm going to bless you going in. I'm going to bless you going out. I'm going to bless you if you do that. I'm going to bless you if you do that. And so, so I would put you at ease
Okay.
over that, although that wasn't just for you.
Yeah.
But
No, that's
yeah,
good.
I believe that. I believe that God is a good God. He's not vengeful. He's not looking for a way to slice you up, or
Right.
to make your life more difficult. But I do honor people who say, no, I hear God speaking to me,
Right.
and I'm going to stay in the hard place because I hear him speaking. But short of that, where God would say, I don't have a direction for you here. Why don't you just use the wisdom that I already gave you
Mm-hmm.
to make that decision? And
Yeah.
I'll be with you. So
That's good. That's really good. Well, that does put me at ease.
Good. I'm
It
glad.
wasn't just for me,
Then
but
my job
thank
is
you.
done here,
Yeah.
right?
All right, we can be done. No, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. I did have another question, kind of related to. I'm kind of just piggybacking off of what you're saying, but what do you think the difference between that, everything you just said? What do you think the difference between the "I'll bless you where you are"? Where does it come into collision with obedience? Like, does that make sense? Like when
Yeah, say a little more to me.
Yeah, so like for instance, maybe that's one side of the coin, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not a coin. I'm getting all metaphor now, but maybe one side of the coin is I'll bless you where you are, you know. But is the other side of the coin then? No, God does always have a plan A. It's almost in my brain it felt a little contradictory when I heard you say that. So in a sense, I'll bless you where you are, but there's always a plan A. So shouldn't I always ask you, won't you always speak because you're always speaking? I think I struggle with that probably this morning, today, yesterday. Like I don't want to. I do believe that too to some degree, that like God will always bless you no matter where you go, if you backslide and come back, whatever. Um, but when is obedience? When am I using that to justify disobedience? Is that a thing? Am I thinking too hard about this? I don't know.
No, you're thinking about it, so that's good. I don't know about thinking too hard. Whenever it's a disobedience to the scriptures, that's another thing,
Sure.
I believe. We're talking about disobedience or what we perceived disobedience for a life move or anything like that. Again, I go back to there's so much grace from God. We all want to be obedient to God. And so I think that is a matter again of leaning into him and getting to know his voice. That I think happens over time. We don't come to Jesus and on day one we are experts now
Right.
at the voice of
Right.
God. I think that is a life journey. So I think that's proven by people in the Bible all over who were trying to listen to God, and some of them got it right, and some of them got it really wrong, and some of them got it
Right.
both
Right.
ways. Um, but that's us.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not different
Right.
than them. I mean, again, all you have to do to prove that is just read the Bible. And that's why when we say, difficulty won't come into your life, I always chuckle at that a little bit because you don't have to read very many pages
Right.
to realize that is everywhere.
Yeah.
And that too can be the plan of God for your life. The James says every good and perfect gift comes from the Father above, the Father of lights. There's no shadow of turning. But that whole passage is in the context of difficulty, where James says, count it all joy when you fall into various kinds of difficulties. And so sometimes we equate those difficulties with a disobedience, and it is anything but that. Sometimes the perfect gift is the gift of difficulty. The perfect gift is the gift of I don't know what to do. But I think that's a process of continuing to practice listening to the voice of God. And if practicing listening to the voice of God brings you somehow a punishment from God, then I think that we're talking about a weird relationship there
Right.
that is not congruent with who God is.
Sure.
He wants you to lean in. He wants you to listen to his voice. He wants you to even, if I could say, experiment with listening to his voice and what he had to say.
Right.
And if you occasionally get it wrong, and you will, not all wrongs are equal, but when it's disobedience to the actual word of God, then you have disobeyed the voice of God. I mean, the voice of God is the word of God.
Right.
We're looking for an audible here, and it's not. It's here
Right.
or on my phone.
Right. In the Bible, however
Right.
you consume it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
No, that's good. Cool. I think that's really good. That's so good. I don't know that I have any other questions for you. The last thing that I would love to ask you, I guess, is just first of all, thank you for
My
coming and
pleasure.
chatting.
Thanks for
I
having me.
I definitely benefited a lot, and I'm sure everybody else listening did as well. Um,
It's great having you back
yeah, thank
in the
you.
area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's wonderful
fun.
to see you and your family
Yeah,
again.
yeah, it's been good. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Um, Before we let you go, though, is there anything that you want to, you know, plug, so to speak, or say, like, where can we find you for people who don't know that you preach almost every Sunday?
Sure.
Where can we hear more of Pastor Kevin?
Yeah. We're at Journey Church, jrnychurch.com. And so that's our website, obviously on social media, different platforms. But love to have anybody check us out. There's all kinds of archives of information, and love what God is doing at Journey Church. We have 5 campuses, so he's blessed it in ways that I could never have imagined.
Yeah.
Feel super humbled to be part of that. I'm no rocket scientist or any of those things. I'm just a regular guy who loves Jesus and wants to raise a church full of disciples who are making disciples. That really is my one goal. Is we want to reach the world, but I really want to see disciples raised at Journey Church who will turn around and make other disciples, who will make other disciples, who will make other disciples. I think that was one of the last words of Jesus to us, right? To go and make disciples, but of all nations. And so not just local work, but the local church ultimately thinks globally. And so however we can do that is what I feel called to do. So it's a pleasure.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's so good. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys want to hear or see or whatever more of this podcast, we are on all the social media platforms as well. Long form will be on YouTube, short form will be on Instagram, TikTok, everywhere with Seek Wisdom as the name for all things we do here. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time.